Thank you, Bishop John. Thank you, Vicky. It's so good to be with all of you. And through the wonders of U.S. Postal Service, the award actually arrived this week. And as you can see, it's rather big and rather generous. It takes up most of my head. So I'm not going to leave it in front of me for my remarks. I just wanted you to see it and to see that it is indeed substantial. And well, I have a few remarks that will keep me on track so I don't go overtime. I want to honor the 20 minutes that you've generously given me. How can I thank you adequately for honoring me with this award? I deeply appreciate Vicki and Bishop John, your generous words. And for many of you, as I was scrolling through the list beforehand, I see so many names that are familiar, that we've been comrades in the struggle for peace together. And many of you have reached out when this announcement came with your personal expressions of appreciation, and they're overwhelming. From the moment that Bishop John, who is also an inspiration and an ally in getting into good trouble, called me and asked if I would accept Pax Christi's award, I've been awed and even somewhat embarrassed by your trust. Great giants and pioneers in justice have received this award in the past. People like Dorothy Day and Helen Prejean and Martin Sheen and Monsignor Ray East and so many other outstanding leaders in the American church. And since learning of your honor, the words of a Sesame Street song have been buzzing in my head. One of these things is not like the other. I shared that sentiment with friends and colleagues and others who heard the news, and they reassured me that I belonged. And I'm not totally sure if I believe that yet, but I trust your judgment and theirs. And I embrace this award with joy and with pride in the organization that grants it. I accept this award with pride in Pax Christi USA, and the reasons for my pride are twofold. The first is the courageous witness that you offer. Standing for peace and justice is not easy. And moreover, Pax Christi is the Catholic peacemaking organization. And let's be honest, at times, your relationship with the official church can be somewhat strained. I'm trying to put this nicely. Working for peace in a fractured world while standing within and speaking out of a troubled and ambiguous faith tradition, which all too often aids and exacerbates these fractures in our world, that takes courage and perseverance and grace. Your witness and your message are not always welcomed by those in power in both the country and the church. And so I take pride in being recognized by you, women and men of courage, faith, and perseverance. The second reason for my pride is that honoring me with this award is itself an act of faithful courage. Let's face it, honoring someone who is Black, publicly gay, and a Catholic priest who denounces white supremacy and ecclesial homophobia as threats to social peace and forms of idolatrous faith, well, there are easier choices you could have made. Honoring my ministry opens you to vilification, rebuke, and rejection from those who pose as guardians of the faith. If Jesus were here today and witnessed the vitriol on certain Catholic websites, he would revise his list of Beatitudes to include one which would read, "Blessed are you when they blog about you and post vile slander against you because of me." Having received more than a few rebukes and rejections from the church for my ministry, I treasure your recognition and support. As I told Bishop John, his phone call to me with this news came at a time when I was really despondent. And I wondered, what's the use? Who needs this crap? Or some other word, I'm keeping it PG right now. All this is to say, your honor, your affirmation of my ministry is more treasured than I can express. Now, of course, we're not strangers to each other. I've had the privilege of both working with your anti-racism team and of addressing this assembly on 3 past occasions, in 2003, in 2010, and most recently at your 40th anniversary celebration in 2013. At that time in 2013, I placed a challenge to Pax Christi USA. I declared that if it was to be relevant and on the frontier as a Catholic peacemaking movement with justice, then it had to be more intersectional in both theory and practice. I declared that peace can no longer be a standalone issue. The crises that face us, militarism, racism, ecology, and poverty, are interlocking, overlapping, and compounded. Single issue groups and struggles will be neither effective nor will they compel people's attention. To paraphrase the great Audre Lorde, many people do not have the luxury of engaging single issue struggles because we do not live single issue lives. Yes, Pax Christi enters the justice struggle through a particular lens, namely a deep concern for peace and a decisive no to violence. But these cannot be its exclusive focus if it is not only to accurately understand society, but also effectively engage it. And so I challenged Pax Christi back in 2013 that to remain relevant and on the frontier as the Catholic movement of peacemaking with justice, that you must be perceived as not only anti-war and pro-nonviolence, you must also make explicit linkages between peacemaking, consumerism, racism, and ecological justice. And you had to be LGBTQ inclusive. This award today is a sign of the seriousness with which you engaged that challenge. It's rare I can talk to a group that actually listened to something I had to say, so I'm grateful beyond words. In preparation for today, I reread that 2013 address. Everything I said then, I reaffirm today with a resounding amen. Intersectional is a word often invoked today, now more than in 2013. While it's an academic sounding word, its meaning is straightforward. It means that power relations of race, gender, class, and sexuality are interrelated and they work together, building upon and mutually shaping one another. This means that threats to peace and justice are complex and multiple. And so the work of peacemaking and peace building must also be complex and multiple. And this leads to my main message today. Here's what the punchline. The greatest threat to peace in our time, both nationally and internationally, is the rise of white nationalism. White nationalism is the existential, visceral conviction that this country, its public spaces, its history, its culture, that these belong to white people in a way that they do not and should not belong to others. That America is and was meant to be and must always remain a white Christian nation. This means that multiracial democracy is an existential threat to white nationalism. The results of the 2020 election, with the election of the first president who ever used the phrase white supremacy, the election of the first woman and the first woman of color as the vice president, and with her first Jewish spouse of a president or vice president, and the election of the first Black and first Jew as US senators from Georgia. This election was an existential threat to white nationalist hopes and dreams. and the confirmation of its deepest fears. It had to be overturned by any means necessary, including armed rebellion and violent insurrection. The brutal mob violence of January 6th was a clear declaration that many whites would rather live in a white dictatorship than in a multiracial democracy. If democracy means sharing power with people of color, and especially with Black people, they want no part of it. White nationalism, white supremacy is inherently violent and depends upon violence, police violence, carceral violence, rhetorical violence to both create it and maintain it. White nationalism is the gravest threat to peace precisely because it is intersectional, threatening peace and well-being on multiple levels and on multiple forms. Its commitment to racial cultural supremacy is obvious, manifested in voter suppression, crusades against critical race theory, which, by the way, I assure you that most of them have never read a word of, and its public vitriol. But white nationalism is also anti-women, as evidenced in the macho posturing of its standard bearer, the overwhelming male violence of January 6th, and the public vilifications of both Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Representative Liz Cheney, indeed the denunciation of any woman who refuses the directives of male leadership. White nationalism is anti-immigrant and anti-life, with its cruel family separations and sunderings, and its callous indifference to brown lives seeking shelter and safety. White nationalism is also anti-LGBTQ, as evidenced in its homophobic and toxically masculine rhetoric and its hysteria surrounding the smallest attempts to recognize the humanity of trans persons. It is an ecological threat to the survival of this planet, with its obstinate refusal to accept the irrefutable reality of climate change. And white nationalism is a threat to global health and stability through its irresponsible and reckless denigration of mask wearing and routine vaccination in the face of the greatest health crisis to afflict humankind in over a century. I do not exaggerate. White nationalism is a grave threat not only to democracy, but to peace. It is nakedly racist, blatantly homophobic, violently sexist, environmentally irresponsible, and recklessly narcissistic. If Pax Christi is to be relevant as a Catholic movement of peacemaking with justice, it must name white nationalism as the greatest threat to peace. And it must realize that it will remain so for at least the next 3 years, at least through the next election cycle, if not beyond. And your peace activism must understand white nationalism as the intersectional reality that it is. Whew, that's heavy. So let me end where I ended my 2013 address, on the note of contemplative spirituality. White supremacy and white nationalism is a soul sickness, an ailment of the human spirit on a level of which we lack words to describe. Something catastrophic is happening in our country and in our church. Genuine peace, the goal, dream, and passion of Pax Christi, is impossible without a cultural revolution so profound and far-reaching, it is almost impossible to imagine, and perhaps even terrifying to envision. I call to mind a statement that's attributed to Albert Einstein. He said, if we want to change the world, we have to change our thinking. No problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. We must learn to see the world anew. No problem can be solved from the level of consciousness that created it. We need new ways of thinking, living, and loving, new ways of praying and being. We need to be contemplative witnesses of the possibilities of human transformation. We need to be witnesses of a new humanity, of new ways of being human, of becoming, moving from being Homo sapiens to becoming Homo spiritualis. We need to witness to the possibilities of human transformation. And for that to happen, we need to be grounded in the truly real, capital T, capital R, in the infinite radical love who is deeper and bigger than we are. That radical love who sustained our ancestors in the wilderness, even as the Holy One led our ancestors to new places that were undreamed and unimagined, the promised land. In our wilderness times, in our wilderness places, we're summoned to a direct dependence on a God that we can understand only intuitively and vaguely, as through a veil. We are summoned to trust in God alone because no other adequate source of life and strength exists. Contemplative prayer roots us in a horizon beyond the present, which enables us to work for justice despite the odds against us, even despite the near certainty of short-term failures and defeats. For religious hope assures us of a just-filled and peaceful future by grounding it in the reality and the promises of God. Faith assures us that even though human beings can delay, they cannot ultimately deny the fruition of God's purpose. My enslaved ancestors sang, "We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord." Our hope lies not in what is of our doing. Our hope stems from a quiet, deep, even if at times dark and obscure trust that the God of Shalom accompanies us, guides us, and will not abandon us. For me, this hope is made real today by you, and by this award that you honor me with. Let us continue to be pioneers for making a world of shalom, a world of inclusive love and inclusive justice for all. I accept this award today in a spirit of rededication and recommitment to what Martin Luther King called, quoting him, the long and bitter but beautiful struggle for a new world. I invite you today to make that same rededication and recommitment to this long and beautiful struggle for a new world and a new church and a new way of being human. Once again, my deepest thanks to you all. Thank you.